One thing I can tell you, guys, this is a fact. The more you study church history, the more you're going to see. This is a fact. Before God, I will answer if I'm lying. The ancient churches that have been there from the beginning, Catholic Church, I know that's demonized by the world. I don't care what the world thinks. Syrian Church, Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, these churches have been there from the beginning. And the fullness of the truth, the correct application of Christianity is found in these churches. I came to that conclusion studying church history, meaning the second, third, fourth centuries of what Christians taught. I was shocked. It troubled me, and people who know me can testify. I had a dilemma in my hand. Either all of these Christians were heretics, which would be blasphemy, because that means Jesus failed the church. That's blasphemy. Christ said he'd be building his church, the Spirit would be guiding the church, and the apostles would appoint leaders filled with the Spirit to preserve the truth. And Christ taught this will be an unbroken chain. So they cannot be false teachers, because that means then Christ failed. That means they were the true Christians. But then they taught stuff that as a Protestant I was taught are false heretical doctrines. So that led me in one or two of them. Either they're false teachers, and happening, or my teachings are not ancient, not biblical, because we're misunderstanding the Bible. And so it took me 10 years to want to just say, you know what? I got to go back to the ancient churches. And so that shocks a lot of people. These traditions that these ancient churches hold to, you know, like the Eucharist becoming the body and blood of Christ, or Mary, perpetual virginity. Why do you guys believe it's not in the Bible? See, that's where I was 20 years ago.
And I would suggest that he goes back 20 years and actually study church history without having some level of confirmation bias. Because it is evident that he grew up in a Catholic church, walked away from a Catholic church, went into Protestant churches, and then came back to the Catholic Church. Now, of course, this is going to be lauded by Catholics as a wonderful and great thing. You should. It's your church. You have confirmation bias. But in his own confirmation bias, he failed to actually look at church history. Instead, he was looking at the history of the victors. And let me explain that for a second. And we're going to start from when the Catholic Church truly established itself and go backwards in time. So when you look at the fact that the Catholic Church became the Catholic Church, the dominating church, because in 381, Emperor Theodosius I said that all of the Roman Empire will be Christian, and that Christianity was under the Roman Catholic Church. So that means that the Roman Catholic Church from that point on had the authority of the government and the military in support of itself in order to dominate all of the versions of Christianity that were around in the 4th century. And so from the 4th century on, all you get is the Catholic Church as the dominant force, as the head, the lead, and the one who writes the histories. And we know that Eusebius of Caesarea was very prominent in the 4th century of determining what is the history of Christianity. Now, since Eusebius was writing this, and Eusebius was dominant in this, was a dominant figure in this, and you had others like St. Augustine and Jerome, you had other people, but since they were the dominant ones who were determining what was going to be the history of the Christian church and the Christian movement, backed by the Roman government and the Roman military, then their histories became truth, because otherwise you would die at the sword, or you would die of starvation or economic excommunication because of it. So the Catholic Church became the dominant church. They wrote the history. Before Eusebius, there were people like Irenaeus. Irenaeus wrote that Polycarp had learned from John the Baptist, although Polycarp never said he learned from John the Baptist. Irenaeus writes this because he wanted to claim some type of authority. He was claiming this authority based on the idea that, like in the books of Acts, where it is the apostles who appoints the deacons, it is the apostles who appoints the bishops, it is the apostles who bring in the new apostle. So based on those writings in Acts, Irenaeus determines that Polycarp learned from John, and so he establishes the idea of apostolic succession. But Polycarp never claimed it. Isn't it interesting that the person that he is claiming to have gained it from John never claimed that he gained it from John. But what was happening in and around the same time as Polycarp? What was the biggest movement during that time frame? Well, around 144 CE, you had Marcion. Marcion was the first one to collect 9 letters that are claimed to be written by Paul, but we know only 7 are authenticated to be written by the same person, not necessarily saying that that person is Paul, but definitely written by the same person. Only 7. But Marcion is the first one to create a canon, so to speak, of 10 letters of Paul, and what Catholic Church tradition says is an edited version of Luke, whereas linguistic archaeology is now suggesting that Luke is an edited version of Marcion. And if Luke is an edited version of Marcion, then Marcion is the one who wrote Acts, as well as what you now know as Luke. Now, one of the other things you have to recognize that in 144, there was no Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Justin Martyr called those writings that Marcion put together and the other so-called gospels that was floating around that was written anonymously in that mid-second century, he called them in 150 the letters of the apostles, or the gospels of the apostles, or the wisdom of the apostles. It wasn't until 182 that Irenaeus then named them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And since Irenaeus was following as a Hellenized Greek Christian, he was writing, he was preaching, he was teaching in France, not as someone who came from the Levant, but someone who traveled from Turkey to France to teach Christianity. And without the Roman government support, without Constantine, because I skipped him, without Constantine legalizing Christianity in around 313, without Constantine having Christians in his army, which you can find remnants of that at the Hadrian Wall up in Britain, without Maxentius, who Constantine fought against, having Christians in his army, Christianity would have never taken hold. So truly, was it the hand of God or the hand of man, the hand of the Romans, that decided that Christianity would be able to grow and be able to flourish? Now, was Christianity growing when the Roman government did not support it? It was not legal? Yes, it was growing. And through that growth, it established itself in very important sectors of the Roman government and in the Roman population. But as far as the people in the Levant, the ones who would have been apostles if there ever was an apostle, they are not the ones who established this church. They are merely stories that are told that then, 100 years after Jesus, someone else decided to give it authority. Some Greek, some Hellenized Jews like Philo decided to give it authority. Not any one of these so-called apostles. Philo has no connection nor contact with anyone who would be an apostle. Polycarp, there is no proof that he actually was a follower of John, a disciple of John. So that clears away the apostolic succession. It doesn't exist. It is a created thing by people like Irenaeus, people like Eusebius, people like Augustine, people like Jerome. And that, backed by military and the government, is why Christianity has the history that it has. So if you truly study history, then you will follow Marcion, since he was the earliest one who canonized your Bible. If you was truly following the history of it, you would probably be Gnostic, since the Gnostic movement was a larger movement in first and second century. And it was only because they would not bow down to the government as to why. Study Arius, and you'll see that they did not bow down to the government, which is one of the reasons why they were not supported by Constantine. And the orthodoxy was because they were in the military, they were in the government. So your religion is the government. Your religion is not whatever Levantian religion that was started by some itinerant preacher or by the followers of that preacher. So y'all have a great day, and always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable.